Yesterday, we talked about this week. We've been talking about Reb Eliezer ben Azariah. Eliezer ben Azariah, which his names, both names imply the same thing. They have the word Azar, means to help, and El is God's name, and Azariah is also God's name. So it's talking about how God helps us to serve him. And then when we do serve God and we change our natures, whatever, then that inspires God to give us a bigger blessing. When he gives us a bigger blessing, as we can serve him better. And that reveals more of our potential and reveals more of God's potential. And that in turn reveals more of our potential, and etc. Okay. Where do we see this from Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah? Because Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah, the first day that he became the head of the Sanhedrin, basically the head of the Jewish people, as he passed a law saying that the third chapter of Shema Yisrael, which talks about going out of Egypt, should be said at nighttime. When we say the Shema Yisrael prayer, we say it, it's a commandment to say it twice a day, in the morning and the evening. The morning is no problem to say the third chapter of Shema, because it has the commandment of tzitzit. It talks about tzitzit, and we put on tzitzit in the daytime. But in the nighttime, we don't put on tzitzit. So there was a thought maybe we shouldn't say it. And that seems that they didn't used to say it. Rebbe Eliezer ben Azariah said we should say it, because I learned from what Ben Zoma said, how he interpreted the pasuk, Kol Yamei Chayecha, Lahavi Liyamot Mashiach, Kol Yamei Chayecha, that you should, even in the nighttime, you should say it. And the rabbi said, right, not only in the nighttime, but also in the days of the Mashiach. Kol Yamei Chayecha Lahavi Liyamot Mashiach. All the days of your life should be dedicated to bring to Mashiach. Where did he put this in? In Shema Yisrael. What's the thing of Shema Yisrael? Shema Yisrael is accepting the yoke of heaven. Listen, Jews, we're not alone. God is our God. God is our power. God is creating us. God loves us. He gives us the commandments. He's giving us the commandments. That's what everybody's going to feel in the days of the Mashiach. And now we just believe it. We're saying it. That's Elazar, that God helps us and we help God, and etc. Alpia, now everything we said before, we can understand what it said in the Midrash. Elu Shmot Bnei Yisrael Aboim Mitzrayim. Remember, that's how the Rebbe began this whole speech that he's giving. And the Rebbe brought a Midrash that seems to contradict what it says clearly in the Torah. A Midrash that says clearly, it says the opposite of the simple meaning of the Torah. What does the Midrash say? It says that the beginning of this week's Torah portion, which is the beginning of the whole book of Exodus, it lists the name of the Jews that went into Egypt. And that's what the sentence says. Elu Shmos Bnei Yisrael Haboim Mitzrayim. These are the names of the Jews that come into Egypt. That's pretty simple. I mean, you don't have to have much explanation. That the Midrash said, this is talking about the Jews that came out of Egypt. And the Rebbe said, well, how can you say it like that? I mean, it's against the simple, obvious meaning. I mean, it's like saying a car is a dog. You can't do it. How can you say that? Here it says in the Torah, the Holy Torah, says this is the names of the Jews going into Egypt. And the Midrash said this is talking about the Jews going out of the exile. Ge'ulat Yisrael. Even though the Parsha is talking about exactly the opposite, but nevertheless, the Midrash said this is talking about not going into Egypt, as it says clearly, but it's talking about going out, not just of Egypt, going out of all of the exiles. Says, I'll tell you why. Why? Because Maskirin Yitzias Mitzrayim B'Leilas. That's what Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah said, that we have to talk about going out of Egypt in the nighttime. This indicates that you say this thing of Boim Mitzrayim, the fact that the Jews went into Egypt, they went into exile, the going into the nighttime, the darkness of exile, This is the talking about going out of Egypt. Ad lahavili mot Mashiach, talking about and thinking about and longing for going out of Egypt. This is what's going to take us out of the darkness. Because even though everything is dark, right, and we are in Egypt, we're in exile. That's a simple meaning. But nevertheless, by talking about it, that's what's going to take us out of Egypt. That's what it says it's mentioning. This brings to the days of the Mashiach. We have to talk about how God took us out of Egypt. Listen, we can't forget that Judaism is based on a miracle. It's not just that one person came out from the desert or something and he said, I have the way to bring you into heaven and you are going to now be basking in the glory of the Lord. And that's not how it worked. Everybody saw that God is more powerful than the world. Everyone saw that God loves the Jews. Why? Makes no sense. But that's it. That's God's. Just like God created the world. Why he created the world? Who knows? Created the world. You know how many frogs there are in the world? You know how many fish there are in the world? You know, why are so many fish? Why so many frogs? Create one frog or one type of frogs. You have to have 50,000 different types of frogs just in one, a square mile of the Amazon jungle. You have to have, who says, right? Why does God have to make so many frogs of so many beetles? I once saw on a National Geographic that they found in one square mile or something like that in the Amazon jungle, they found like 20,000 different types of beetles. Who needs so many beetles? What are they talking about? Why? Because God understands what he's doing. And we don't understand. One of the things that God did is he chose the Jews. Why did he choose the Jews? That's what he did. He chose the Jews. And he chose the Jews and he took them out of Egypt. God personally, big miracles. And this we have to remember all the time. Don't get too used to the world. Don't think that the world is nature. Don't think all these beetles and all these frogs are here because that's, survival of the fittest or whatever it is, right? All those other theories. It could be all those things. Maybe they even work out. It could be that 100%. And you could even prove it. Let's say you can prove that there was one frog and that frog had got a cosmic ray and all of a sudden he become a different color, a different this. 100%. The fact of the matter is that it all comes from God every second brand new. The reason there's cosmic rays and that there's permutations and that there's mutations and this, it's all from God every second. And what's the proof? God took the Jews out of Egypt. It was totally illogical, made no sense, but it was earth-shaking. Changed the whole world. There was never such a thing like that in the history of the world. Atom bomb was like nothing compared to this. The whole entire nation of Egypt was turned upside down. Egypt has ruled the whole world. And God took the Jews out, that the Jews had no power, no weapon, no nothing. Took them all out, 10 plagues, split the sea, did all these things, gave them the Torah. It shows that not only does God exist, but in a way, the world doesn't exist. When God wants to, he just changes the whole thing in a second. So we can think, okay, maybe that was a long time ago, maybe, and it's written in a book. Who knows if it even happened, and why have the Jews believed in it all the time? That doesn't make any difference. It's some sort of something lacking in their DNA or something that they believe the story. But say whatever you want to. You can say all those things, but it's not true. The fact of the matter is that God really does care and that God will take us out of the exile that we're in now. But how? By means of us thinking about what happened back then. Just like back then, what happened when God took us out of Egypt, it's real. And the God that took us out is the same God as now. And is the same God that's creating the whole world right now was creating it back then. And just like God did big miracles for the Jews back then, when we think about it, then we'll start to look at the world different. We'll understand this world is not permanent, and this world is not the boss, and that by God, this world is tremendously important, and God will change the world for us. We have to talk about it. So that's what it means, going into Egypt. This is what's going to take us out of Egypt. When we talk about the Jews going into Egypt, and there is such a thing as exile, and that God took us out of exile, this is the true idea of going out of Egypt. That's going to be the days of the Mashiach. Like we said before, therefore, Hashem Geulas Yisrael, The whole reason we're even reading about the Jews going into Egypt and suffering there is order that by reading it and thinking about it and talk, this is what's going to cause the real redemption of us going out of the exile that we're in now. And as I said 1,000 times before, and I'll say it 1,000 times again until at least it convinces me, maybe I'll become convinced of it, that the whole idea of going out of exile means we don't know who we are. We don't know what a Jew is. We don't know what a human being is. We don't know what a tremendous potential we hold for good. Man uses, what does it say, 1% of his brain, something like that. Look it up. I don't know, a percent of his brain. A person uses 1% of his brain. He uses 0% of his soul. We're not using these powers. In the ground, there's hidden resources we have no idea in the ground, in water, in the air, in the sun. We can use these potentials to do good and to bring out good. It's all hidden in potential. The idea of Moshiach is he'll bring out all the good potential which is in everything and in everyone. And this is the thing that didn't happen when the Jews got out of Egypt. God took them out of Egypt, but the people themselves didn't change. Therefore, that's the whole idea of going into Egypt, was that we will, going in, that's how this Torah portion starts off, that, namely, Mitzrayim Gevula, the word for Egypt means limitations. This will bring about that there'll be the future redemption. The Geula, Amiti Tashlema, the Hosef, the true and complete redemption, that man will really be man, and the world will really be a world. We'll see what, well, Hosef and Tehran, that the Jewish people that came into Egypt were 70 souls, it says, 70. 70 people went into Egypt. That was the whole family of Jacob. That was all the Jews. Bnei Yisrael, 70. As Yesh Lomar, we can say that this is also hinted at Shetochen Avoda, that the whole idea of us serving God is even in going into Egypt, in the exile, among the 70 nations of the world, that they correspond to the 70 souls of the Jews, the 70 people, Jewish people that went into Egypt. And the nations are divided into 70. How exactly that comes out, I don't know. This is the nations are 70 nations. Yegaleh will be revealed, the Geulas Yisrael, the redemption of the Jewish people, by the 70 souls going in among the 70 nations, as that will refine all of the nations also. That the ability to do this comes from the 70 souls. Yotze Yerach Yaakov, that came out of Jacob. What is the ability of all the non-Jews in the world to reveal their potential? The 70 nations, by the 70 Jewish souls, root souls. For instance, Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. That's why Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah said, I am like 70 years old, even though he was only 18. This gives the power that we can talk about going out of Egypt in the nighttime, and talking about the miracles that were back then in Egypt, how God controls the world and he took us out. This will bring to the days of the Mashiach. Then we will get the ayin, the 70, but the ayin is also the I. I is ayin in Hebrew. And if you look in a Torah scroll and see how Shema is written, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, so the word Shema is written with the big ayin. The last letter is big, ayin Rabasi, of Kriya Shema. And in Shema, we mentioned the going out of Egypt. So here we have all these things. The 70 souls went among the 70 nations in order to reveal what the eye of God, seeing things in the world, revealing things in the world. That's the number ayin. Ayin is 70. And that corresponds to the 70 years of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that he was the one who started this thing of, let us talk about going out of Egypt, even in the nighttime, and that will bring to Yemot HaMashiach, the days of the Mashiach. And from this, we can understand also what this midrash comes to teach the Jewish people. Which midrash? That the first sentence of the book of Shemot is talking about going out of Egypt. Sheyedu, we should know. That even now we are in exile. Hari Nosef is in addition to the fact that the Jewish people still exist and that we exist in the most complete way. Jewish people, we're still Jews. Like it's hinted at the end of Parshas Vayechi, Vayechantu oto vayasem ba'aron b'Mitzrayim. Says that that Yosef died, and that they preserved him and put him into a casket in Egypt. Vayechantu oto, why? In order that his physical body should remain physical. How they did this and what they did, I don't ask me. Hare the Elushmot ben Israel. Nevertheless, the body of Yosef still is intact. And the reason was so that it would remain even when the Jewish people got out of Egypt. And even now in the future redemption. That's what it says. These are the names of the Jewish people that came to Egypt. This adds even more on the redemption, Geula, that's mentioned over here. That's the redemption of the Jews going out of Egypt that's talking about. Yosef, like it says, no. It says Yosef Hashem Shenis, God will again gather the Jewish people, it says. But Nosef Lazeh, in addition to the fact that the Jewish people remain complete, just like Yosef remained complete, souls and bodies, in the physical bodies and spiritual together, Neshama Bri, a healthy body and a healthy soul and a healthy body. Right, that's the whole idea of the raising of the dead. But Tachlis Hashlemos, an ultimate completion, we're still standing, not just that we bring to the redemption, but even more, the redemption itself. Kol Yomei Chayecha, that all of the days of our life will be to bring to this redemption. We'll feel it every day of our life. What does it mean? According to this, Efshar Lahavin, now we can understand the connection of Shmot to Chaf Tevis, the 20th day of Tevis. This was a couple of days ago, which was the day of the passing away of the Rambam, Maimonides. It also happens to be the day of the passing away of Rabbi Yaakov Abu Chatzira. He's buried in Egypt. He was the father of Rabbi Yisrael Abu Chatzira in Israel. They were very close to the Rebbe also. They were tremendously holy people. But the Rebbe didn't mention that here, especially because they hadn't, the Rabbi Yisrael hadn't passed away yet. Anyway, it's the day of the passing away of the Maimonides. Maimonides passed away on Chaf Tevis. That it always comes right next to Parsha Shmot, the book of Exodus. And in this year it comes an Erev Shabbat. And by us it was on, was it last Wednesday or something? And especially according to what's known, that the eating of Shabbos comes by means of the work we do before Shabbat. So that year when the Rebbe was speaking, the date that the Rambam passed away fell on Erev Shabbat, Friday. And it says the day of Erev Shabbat, Friday is the day that's supposed to be devoted to preparing for Shabbat. Like the rabbis say, Misha Tarach B'Erev Shabbat, a person that works and the day before Shabbat will eat on Shabbat. So the Rambam, Maimonides, that the Maimonides, in addition to the fact that he's the only, excuse me, his book, which is a 14-volume book. It's called the Yad HaChazaka. Yad is 14, Yud Dalet, is the only book in Judaism that covers all of the laws of Judaism. All of the laws of Judaism. And even though there's, he wrote this in order that people would comment, and some people might disagree, but nevertheless, all the laws of Judaism are there. Even laws that are not operable now. The Holy Temple, the sacrifices, laws of Tzorat, right? Things that just don't exist now. They only exist in the days of the Moshiach. And who knows even then if they'll exist. Well, there's going to be Tzorat in a spiritual way. Nevertheless, all the laws of Judaism are there. But he's the only book that talks in legal terms about Mashiach. He gives the legal criteria, what Mashiach has to be, what he has to do. what his job is going to be, what his criteria are, where he has to come from. It's the last chapter, 2 chapters of the Rambam. He talks about this. Rambam is a Rabbi Moses ben Maimon. That's Rambam. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon. That's his name. It's called the Rambam. In English, they call him Maimonides. Okay, but the fact is that he's the only book that gives, the only one that gives final decisions about Mashiach, and no one in Judaism disagrees with him. At least no one of his level. I mean, everybody in Judaism, you can't find anybody saying anything that somebody doesn't disagree with. But no one of his level disagrees with what he says. People might omit what he says. They might try to ignore what he says. But the fact is he's the only one. Okay. So the Rambam, what's this is? So that year when the Rebbe was speaking, it was the date of the passing of the Rambam. The Rambam died like, 800 years ago, something like that, 800 years. The date that the Rambam passed away happened to fall on Friday. And Friday was the day that you prepare for Shabbat. Shabbat. So it says, what does it mean? By the Rambam, we can see clearly how it is that when he was in Boy Mitzrayim, that Rambam, Maimonides, even when he was in a situation of exile, it was in Egypt, and the Egyptians weren't particularly found, and it was a Muslim country then, and they weren't particularly fond of Jews. The whole thing of Islam was that they claimed that they're the true Jews, they replaced Judaism, we don't need. So they were not fond of Jews at all. And somehow the Maimonides, they respected him tremendously. And especially because Maimonides, he wrote, clearly that their religion is wrong and etc. And that he sort of disguised it a little bit, according to some, anyway. But he wrote all the laws of Judaism, and he wrote, what happens to the laws of the non-Jews, by the way. He's the only one also that really codified the 7 Noahide commandments. He wrote clearly about what those laws are, Maimonides. But they had tremendous respect for him, and he was even the chief doctor of the king, the sultan, over there in Egypt, in Cairo, Kahir. So even when he was in a situation of Boy Mitzrayim, and he had a lot of personal problems that he had, his brother died. Nevertheless, over there, he did the Gulas Israel. Nevertheless, there in Egypt, in the middle of this terrible exile, he was free. Spiritually, spiritually, and regarding the darkness that there was in the exile that was then, just like going out of Egypt in the nighttime, and even more, he prepared physically for the going out of Egypt. He wrote it in his book, like he wrote in the Rambam. Rambam, in fact, the first letters, the initials of Rambam is Rabot Moftai Be'eretz Mitzrayim. Rabot, many, I will increase my miracles in the land of Egypt. Rabot Moftai Be'eretz Mitzrayim. This is God says to Moses, I'm going to take the Jews out of Egypt, go to Paro, he's going to refuse, but I'm going to because I want to make a lot of miracles. That's Rambam, is Rabot Moftai Be'eretz Mitzrayim. Many miracles in the land of Egypt. Piyotam Mitzrayim, when Rambam, Maimonides, was in Egypt, Pashtus, Chiber, that's where he composed, he wrote his big book, his great masterpiece, what's called Mishnah Torah, these 14 volumes containing all the laws of the Torah. Laws of laws, Mekabetz the Torah Baal Peh. He knew the whole entire Talmud, and he knew how to take the laws. He remembered everything. This learning the Torah, this is what's going to bring the future redemption. Take us out of darkness of the nighttime in exile. Rambam, the Maimonides, in the darkness of the exile, he gathered together all the laws from the Torah Shebal Peh, from the Talmud. Shezeh Pal Gula, this brought about the redemption in a state of darkness and nighttime of exile. Like the Rambam writes in the beginning, the reason that he even made this amazing book that he did on is tremendously long, was in order to negate the concealment and the darkness which was made when people learned the Torah and they didn't understand it. So people would learn the Torah and they didn't understand, so they were discouraged. So he said, I'm going to write a book that's the result of all of the laws of the Talmud. You read my book and you'll understand all the laws of the Talmud. Sha'osama Pirushim, that these laws and the responsa were very difficult in those days. In Mevin, people didn't understand things properly. The Rambam saw that people weren't understanding the ideas. They were quoting the Torah, but they were misinterpreting it. Therefore, I said, I'm writing a book that will clarify in a clear language all of the laws of the Torah. And also, and so we actually did. That the book of the Rambam became a more derech, it became a guiding light for all of the Jewish people through all the generations, beginning with the Jewish people that were in Egypt in the generation of the Maimonides. And you could take his book and you could learn what to actually do in day-to-day life. And how to take out from the Talmud to make the Talmud into a practical book. Umisham, from then, from then there were laws came out to all sorts of places in the whole world. And like it's known from the letters of the Rambam, out until the Jewish people and the generations which were after that, including also all the many multitudes of books, beginning with the Shulchan Aruch, which written by the Beit Yosef, which was like 400 years after the Rambam. They're all founded on the laws of the Rambam, of Maimonides. In other words, that the Maimonides, he brought about that even when there was a situation of darkness and evening, nighttime, in Egypt, simple Egypt, he lived in Egypt. And the word Egypt, and Egypt, of course, in those days of the Rambam, wasn't the same thing as it was in the time of Moses. But nevertheless, the word Egypt means limitations, and certainly the Jews were limited there to observing Judaism. But nevertheless, he brought about that there could be going out of Egypt and a redemption of the Jewish people. Like that the first, like the Rebbeinu HaKodesh, the one who wrote the Mishnah, the same thing. Why did he write down the Mishnah? Because people were learning the Talmud and they weren't understanding it properly, right? The Rebbeinu HaKodesh, he came, 1,000 years, something like that, before the Rambam, right, was. But when he wrote down the Mishnah, so he wrote it down so that it would be possible for people to not forget the Torah, to learn. They would have what to learn. In order, of course, it was written down only by hand, right? He was 500 years before there were printing presses. The Rambam was like, 300 years before there were printing presses. Kadei, in order, Shalo Tishkach, so that the Torah would not be forgotten, the oral Torah, the explanation of the Torah would not be forgotten from the Jewish people. Like it's also the hinting at the beginning of the Mishnah was Me'emasai Koremet Shema Ba'arvit. That's how the Mishnah begins. The first Mishnah, we talked about this before. In Brachot, when do we read the Shema in Arvit? Me'emotai is from fear also. Me'ema also me'ema. We fear the Shema in the nighttime. It says that we talk about going out of Egypt in the nighttime. And I think we're going to have to stop here. And we'll finish this tomorrow. Let's see, how much more do we have to go? Yeah, not that much. So you know what? We'll finish this tomorrow. Maybe we'll go up to the right at the end. Huh? 1 minute. Okay. We'll finish up to this. And even more, in addition to the fact that the Rambams made it that we can talk about going out of Egypt in the nighttime. In other words, he wrote down all of the laws of the Torah. We can learn Torah in the nighttime of exile. And also, the Rambam also wrote the laws of the Moshiach so that we can talk about Moshiach, the future redemption. We know that there's going to be such a thing and what it's going to be. And it says you have to wait for the Mashiach. The Rambam says anyone who doesn't believe in Mashiach and wait for his arrival is denying the whole Torah. And he gave the criteria what we're supposed to wait for. So this is not just up in the air. The Rambam also brought about the idea of calling Mechayecha Lavi Lemot Mashiach. He also brought about this idea of that all of the days of your life, your energy and the days could be devoted to bringing Mashiach. Like it's known, the Sefer Rambam has all the laws of the Torah, even the laws which are in the time of the Holy Temple, right? And what the laws of them, and including the laws of the Mashiach in the end. That this indicates that the Jewish people, this shows the Jewish people and teaches the Jewish people all of the laws which are relevant to the days of the Mashiach, how a person should prepare for this. And the order, what Mashiach is, how we can recognize who Mashiach is. And even more, that the Rambam lived 70 years. He passed away at the age of 70. The days of his life were 70 years. And this indicates that he was, in a revealed way, a complete life. Like Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah said, I am like 70 years old. And just like Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah said, I am 70 years old. When he was 70 years old, he was like 70. He could talk about going out of Egypt. And by talking about it, that brought and it helped to bring the future redemption in any situation, even in the night times. Even in the nighttime, like we said before about Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah. So the Rambam was 70 years old. That's a 70. As it's known that the day of a passing away of a tzaddik, that all of his deeds and his Torah that he served his whole life, they go up, they were elevated. This will shine and be revealed below, and it will cause blessings and salvation in this physical world. So we can understand that the day of Chaf Tevis, the day that the Rambam passed away, the day of the passing away of the Rambam, is found and is revealed all of the good deeds and all of the efforts and all of the Torah that the Rambam did in his whole life. Those things are eternal, and they're revealed on this day. And when he wrote this book, that then in the land of Egypt, the Kol Sha'ar and everything else that he served in the course of his whole 70 years of his life, this brought salvation in the physical world in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, in a way that this will be a mora derech. This will show the way and illuminate the path of all the Jewish people for all the generations. So according to this, now we can understand the whole idea of that we have to prepare for the food of Shabbat before Shabbat. What Shabbat is the preparing for? This coming Shabbat we have now, Shmot. And Shmot is talking about what? The Jewish people going into Egypt, into the darkness of exile. And there in Egypt, by talking about the fact that God takes us out of Egypt, is that will bring the future redemption. Since that this came by means of the Jewish people in Egypt, it was a tremendous effort and work that they had to do in Egypt. And now we're comparing Egypt to Erev Shabbat, to Friday, because that's preparing for Shabbat, for the going out of the. So all the deeds and all of the Torah and all the service that the Rambam did in the course of the 70 years of his life, they're all come in a big bundle, revealed now, because when the Rebbe, that year that the Rebbe spoke, the date that the Rambam passed away was Friday. It came out Friday, the day before. This brings about a salvation in the world, and this Erev Shabbat. So now we can understand that this Shabbat will be Geulas Yisrael. There can be the future redemption. Now, a normal person can say, okay, so the Rebbe said this and it didn't happen. So that's it, and that's one way you can say it, one way, but it's a very negative way of saying it. For sure, what God says is true, and for sure what the Rebbe says is true. So if it wasn't revealed then, so for sure it's going to be revealed now. How much more so? It's not that the time has passed and that's it. There's not going to be any redemption. That's the mistake that the Jews made for the holiday of Purim. The Jews thought that there's not going to be any redemption. 70 years of exile passed, and it's not so. So here we are 30 years after the Rebbe said this. And the Rebbe said the redemption is going to come right now on this Shabbos. Everything is prepared. And we see that, in fact, we're still in exile. So if it didn't happen, then for sure it's going to happen now. And a person can't say that, listen, what are you talking about? It didn't happen when the Rebbe said it. It hasn't happened for the last 2,000 years we've been exiled, right? So that's Egypt talk. That's exile talk. That's darkness, nighttime. The night is not going to go away. There's not going to be any morning. It's not going to happen, right? Never was and it never will be. There's no sun, there's no morning, and there's no daytime. It's always going to be nighttime, and that's it. Get used to it and accept the fact, says the Rebbe, that's called exile. That's called Gullus. And the Rambam, Maimonides, he was in a more difficult situation than we're in now. And nevertheless, he wrote his whole book to teach us how we should be like him and talk about, think about, do everything possible to bring the future redemption, and it'll happen. As we're going to continue, God willing, tomorrow, God willing, we'll finish this, and we will learn a sikh of the Rebbe. Okay, here we go. Now let's do the Yom Yom.